Welcome to She Rebel Radio, a community-driven podcast dedicated to supporting women to unlearn conventional rules and create businesses of significance. Each season, She Rebel Radio brings you insights and advice from noteworthy women entrepreneurs who strive to create more meaning, impact, and purpose. Now here is your host, Lulu Minns.
Welcome to episode 82 of She Rebel Radio, Containing the Wildness with Bethany Rose. Bethany is a spoken word artist, poet, speaker and author of Neon, a book of poetry which softly lights the shadowy path of the everyday, including LGBT issues, mental health, grief and longing. Her poetry is described as spliced with light, electrifying your mind, kissing your soul and with intense poetic fire. Her poems Pink and Lightbulb were featured on the BBC and received millions of views. I discovered her work whilst watching TEDx Women London, where she vividly painted a heartbreaking battle with depression, whilst at the same time managing to bring in a degree of hilarity. Beth really is able to both devastate and astonish. It's amazing to have her here, where we're going to dive into how we crush our everyday normality and contain the wildness of women. Bethany Rose, it's amazing to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm really good, Lulu. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be talking to you.
Oh, and me. Yeah, we had to remind ourselves to hit record, didn't we? Because we started chatting about all sorts of amazing things straight away.
No, and I was worried. I was worried to hit record, and I've had nothing left to say.
Definitely. So we're going to put it all in this episode. So yeah, it's amazing, and I'd love to start with your poem Lightbulb, and in that, and I know the listeners of She Rebel Radio are going to really resonate with this because we talk about it a lot in terms of we are women, we have loud voices, we have lightbulb hearts. What was the meaning and depth of those powerful lines in that poem?
Well, I think that poem was a really interesting one because it had to go through a really heavy editing process, because whenever you do anything for the BBC, things have to be adjusted and amended, and it has to be quite PC, which is difficult because it kind of defeats the objective of what you're doing, but it also means you have a wide reach as well. So it's sort of, you have to find a happy medium with them. Okay. And that was one of the only original lines in it that they kept, which was great. And
I'm glad I picked that line out. I could feel that.
I know. Thank you. I think sometimes for me, like I have a real thing about light, and I think that we always talk about like hearts as, you know, the fire in our heart. And I was thinking, what other means of light are there? And I've got a big thing about artificial wildness. So like I love like water contained in swimming pools and plants contained in pots. I love the idea of wildness being contained, and I feel like that's what a light bulb is, and that's what being a woman is it's a restrained wildness. Yeah. And so it's a holding as well. And for me also, like I wish I was somebody that could keep my own light bulb on 24/7, but I am somebody that I require a current, and I require electrics, and I get that from connection with people. You know, my partner is more introverted, and I really envy her sometimes because she can kind of keep her light and like dim it to a lower level, and it's her choice. Whereas I feel like, I mean, I've tried to be a different person, but I'm stuck with this, so I've got to go with it, which is that for me, like sometimes I can physically, when I meet someone I really connect with, or write something that feels really meaningful to me, or do something that feels important, I literally feel my heart light up. It's like it's a bit like if someone pulled it out of my chest and then dipped it in a vat of lemonade. That like a sherbet fizzy heart. It's like fizzing. And sometimes I'd love a glow, but that's just not who I am. It's that you know. And I feel like a lot of the time something I've had to learn is the containment of that. And I think that's something to do with being female, with having mental health issues, and with being gay. It's like, don't be, you know, we'll talk about this in a bit, but don't be too much of anything, because actually otherwise I think I learned the hard way as well, is that if you don't contain it, people don't listen because they don't take you seriously, because it's too overwhelming. So I feel like I feel like with my work and writing and my life, it's a constant balancing act of keeping the light inside the bulb.
Yeah. So powerful. I know how many of the She Rebel radio listeners are going to resonate with that contained wildness. I know, with my clients talk about wildness a lot of women and that being quite a natural position for us. And also my background is multiple braining in terms of coaching, and the heart, being in a real strong area of neurointelligence, and one that we also, as much as women have been suppressed, that the heart and following that has been suppressed in society as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned of, being told at times you're too much and feeling like,
yes.
That.
I mean, that was very kind of you to say at times. I mean, always. I think not anymore, actually, not since I became more grown up, I suppose. But I think up until I was about 27 or 28, I think people just don't know what to do with a sad gay girl a lot of the time. And it really makes me laugh now, because it's like I literally make money from being a depressed lesbian. And if you had told me that 20 years ago, when I was 13, when all I was doing was trying not to be that this will literally be the thing that makes you happy and pays your bills, I just wouldn't have believed you, because it was just, it was just something that was just sort of knocked out of me. And I think it's partly because people were protective of me, and I bruise so easily, and I still do. Like I have to control how I watch the news or things like that, because I also, not only am I too much, but I find the world too much. This morning when I walked to work, I moved a snail out of the road because I didn't want it to get hit. But it's not a very boundaried way to live, really. But I think for me, like something that I always teach my young people is if anyone tells you that you're too much, tell them they're not enough, because I think it's such a toxic thing to say. I think it's a toxic thing to say to a woman. I think men use it as a means of control, of being like, you're too gay, or you're too rebellious, or you're too feminist, you're too this, you're too that. And it's like, how much do I need to dilute myself in order for you to find my views palatable? And I find that incredibly difficult, but also I acknowledge that my views have to be relatively palatable, or no one's going to listen. We've all got those friends who have such severe stances on things that we almost can't engage with them on it. So it's about trying to find this kind of mix. But I think when I say that in my talk, what I'm referring to actually is, I have always been incredibly open about being gay, but I've also been incredibly open about having despicably awful mental health issues. And if someone says to me, who I barely know, how are you? I don't say fine. I say, well, I'm really sad today. I'm just so sad. I just don't understand why people think this world is okay. And I can't believe this thing is happening in Yemen. And people just look at me like, what? I just wanted you to go, yeah, fine, thanks.
They want you to follow the social rules, and particularly
absolutely,
like be nice and polite, and just say the thing. I know, for me in the legal profession, I got the tone it down, you're too aggressive. And as we were talking about before we hit record, I was a defense lawyer. My job was to articulate and push things and get shit done, if I could put it in that way. And my clients. So, what do you think the impact for us is as women when we're told too much? We're too much, step back, tone it down, and how can we overcome it and step more into that light that you talked about? And you've shared a bit with us already, but any more tips for the kind of listeners within that of how do we overcome that?
I think it's something that really helped me, something that I've got the most wonderful therapist. Like, I mean, I feel like a bit like Matilda with Miss Honey with her. And she's just incredible. And she said to me once, I said, I just want everybody to like me. I don't want anyone to be annoyed at me. I just want everyone to get on board with what I'm saying. And I just want everyone to really like me. And she just said, wow, that's a big ask. And actually, that's a big thing of my ego, really, to expect everyone to panic around, making sure everyone likes me. I have to and have had to get comfortable with the idea of being disliked, because I think that's the most toxic thing any woman can have, really, apart from being, cruel, is the desire to be liked, because I think that's the killer of too muchness, of passion, of authenticity, of being like, I don't want to step on anyone's toes, I don't want to be seen as this or seen as that. And I think it just got to the point in my life where I thought the idea of not doing this feels worse. Of not doing this and burning feels worse than the idea of doing it and being criticized. And I think also as well, I did a video once for the BBC, and I didn't expect it to happen, but it got like 5.5 million views, and I was not ready for that. I mean, I was wearing a t-shirt with cat fur on it, because normally only about like 30 people watch poetry videos. I did not know that was going to happen. And it actually made me really, really sad, because for every lovely comment, I mean, I stopped reading after the first, when you suddenly realize it's going viral, I think you have to step out.
Yeah.
But there'd be these lovely comments, whatever, and then someone would write like, call me a faggot, or that I was going to burn in hell. And actually I could take that, but then people would be like, and these were the things that really hurt me, and I still can't forget them. I wish I could, but like, her eyebrows are shit, or wouldn't want her as a friend, or imagine how fucking annoying she'd be at a dinner party, and I think that stuff really, like, I was 28, I think, something like that when it came out, and I hadn't yet done the work. And for me, they really were like splinters in my heart. And then it got so bad, it got to the point where it was like, oh my God, like, it can't get any worse. So I may as well just carry on doing what I'm doing. And then I realized that actually, if I'm doing something meaningful, there will always be people that don't like me, always, because that's the cost of meaningful work, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I was having the exact conversation on my group coaching call with my clients only this week.
Really?
Yeah, of like 30% will love what you do, 30% won't care, and 30% will hate it. But it doesn't mean that you don't need to get out there and do that. But on that as well, there's sociological studies, and sociology is my background, of that successful women are less liked by both men and women alike. And that's and that's something almost we have to trade, that and also as women, young girls growing up, we're conditioned that being liked is more important than it is for so it becomes something that we hold closely.
And I think also, I talk about this in school. I think teenagers and boys as well, and but everybody really, we're not taught how to express dislike properly. We're only taught, or even how to apologize properly, or how to communicate, really. But I think I always try and teach my young people, if you don't like something online, unless it's offensive or like politically very difficult for you, you don't need to comment. You can just move on. Just say, like, I don't know, you're watching a dog video and you don't like someone's color of their front door, just swipe up, boys, like, just leave it be. Or and don't comment on looks, or
I think there's a book called Why Social Media is Ruining Your Life, and it says in there, like, life's too short to argue with people on social media. And I think people feel like that, and it's proven, isn't it, that women get more abuse, more misogyny, and negative comments that are made.
But what really surprised me as well, I really did stop looking after it got more than like 1,000 views. I just was like, whoa, I stopped. But like the amount of women who were rude, and that was the killer for me, because a man can pretty much call me anything, and I just think it's funny because, not in a horrible way, but fuck men. But like, it was just silly to me. But it's when I just like, like, I went on this woman who said this about my eyebrows, obsessed with this comment about my eyebrows. I went on her profile, and she's this nice, normal person with like 3 girls and a dog. I was just like, what are you doing? Like, why are you up at midnight commenting on some random lesbian's poetry video about her eyebrows? I just can't get my head around it.
Yeah, it makes no sense. And I know one of your older videos on your website is I think from 2016, and you can really see your evolution, and you're actually talking about the impact of social media on our evolution as human beings.
Yeah,
I think that's even more relevant now. We've had like pandemic, we've had Brexit, we've had, how is social media impacting our evolutionary progress? What the bad and the ugly, beyond what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, I think I really worry about the fact that we're not taught how to use it responsibly in schools. I really worry about that we have a whole generation of young people who get their chemical rushes, their dopamines, their serotonin, their everything from the internet, not from connecting with each other in person. It really concerns me. But I think something that also really worries me about social media, apart from, you know, the obvious comparison and all of those things as well, is that I think for me, and this is something I talk about in that poem a few years ago, is I think it is so important for us, in order to go through our evolution and grow, and to be bored. It's so important. And I remember growing up, there were summers, you know, no disrespect to my parents because they're wonderful, but there were summers where I was so bored, you know, I could have cried, and I would walk around the road with my twin, like kicking a Coke can and like writing stories in my head, and then like crushing petals from the garden and trying to make a perfume or something. And it was like, those were the times when the boredom was so visceral that you could almost taste it in the back of your throat. And those are the times that I worked out where my mind goes and what I love. Because I guarantee, you know, if I'd had a phone in my hand from 10, I would never have discovered that I liked miniature worlds and writing, and I would never have had to have created my own escape, because I would have been a passive spectator of someone else's escape, as opposed to having to create my own using my ingenuity. And the other thing that worries me about social media and the internet on a whole, which really concerns me as well, is pornography. Because, you know, I had a teenage boy about 6 years ago say to me, genuinely shocked. He was like, "Mister, you telling me girls don't like it when you like do your thing on their face and then you leave?" And I was like, "What? No, not unless they say that." And he looked genuinely crestfallen. And I realised this boy, he had got his sex education from watching, you know, XTube or Pornhub or whatever. And a lot of this is really hardcore porn. And you're not allowed to talk about it in school, really, but I did anyway, because I ended up getting really worried for the girls, because a lot of the girls came to me after and they said, you know, we feel really pressured. We feel like we have to go, and do all that when it hurts.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's not supposed to have it. If it hurts, you say, please stop. It's, you know, all of these things, but you're not allowed to teach sex as pleasure, only as reproduction.
Yeah,
it's just so difficult,
you know, particularly for girls. Remembering the sex education for girls, the whole we've had another episode on this, actually. You know, the whole, you know, thing of it is the guy getting pleasure and not the girl, and, you know, so much is missing from that narrative. There is a woman, actually, and I can't remember the name of her business. I think she's in America, and it's called Make Love Not Porn. And people like normal couples send their videos in, you know, where it's much a documentary, because that's the reality, isn't it? But you know, because the average age, I think, is 8 years old, that kids are getting access to porn and have no idea. And she said that one, you know, she gets all these letters, and one guy wrote in and said, you know, my 8-year-old asked, is it normal that you wear masks? You know, because that was the kind of stuff that he'd found online.
Oh my God. And then you think, even though I don't ever condone an 8-year-old watching porn, I'd much rather they found that, what you just said, than the alternative.
Yeah. So that's kind of reality. But I love that old poem of yours as well, and you really brought me back, actually. I think you're talking about flicking the Coke can pull things, I think.
Oh yeah, I was saying, I was so bored that we used to count how many cars we could see, green cars we could see on the motorway.
Yeah.
And we used to get that Coke can tab, you know, when you open a can of Coke, and you'd see how many times you could flip it back and forth before it fell off and who would win.
Yeah.
And I remember like being in the car making like noises with our mouth, like just at each other, or like, I can't even, it's nothing huge. It's just these tiny incremental things that were so character building, or just being so bored that I had nothing else to do. So I just went and got, like, I don't know, some rubbish book from my parents' study, the first thing I could find, and ended up spending 3 days like sat on the floor reading Shirley Temple's autobiography. You know, so just nothing else to do.
Well, as you said, discovering what you're really passionate about, what your zone of genius is. And, you know, I often say transformation happens in the space in between things. That's why I'm so retreats that we do. And, you know, we don't have we ban phones and even talking first thing in the morning. So there's that space, right? Oh, so it's so important. But rewinding slightly, this talking about women, the long-term effect. There's a long-term effect for women in terms of the missing narrative in literacy. Because you're just talking about reading Shirley Temple's autobiography. That missing narrative in literacy for women, doubly so for LGBT women. What do you think is the impact of that gap on us as a collective of women, and what does it mean to you to be a woman who is filling that void with a much more truthful narrative?
That's a lovely thing to say. Thank you. I feel like every story that I read about lesbians, they're always these extraordinary, remarkable people who I feel like we're at the phase with our lesbian culture and writing that people were in with straight people in movies in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It's like every lesbian relationship I see, portrayed in books and on film and stuff, a lot of the time I cannot relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
Of just like an everyday normal, that's not fair, I'm not normal, but just an everyday regular pretty broken person going about her business who happens to like girls, as opposed to it being this whole part of an identity. And I think as well, like I think talking about these missing voices, I think in terms of reading about, like, that's why I really like Sylvia Plath, even though I know her poetry is really depressing, but about like the experiences of educated, political, in tune women who are living a domesticated life and what that experience is like.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than being like, I used to work and now I do this, or being like, I'm so many different things, but I'm also able to tell you that, like, when I wash the dishes, like sometimes I feel like my I don't know, my heart's a volcano. Like, how do you, and I think that's something that I really found missing in a lot of stuff, is bringing in the kind of, I think I find the by everyday life incredibly beautiful but incredibly brutal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of gay women do, that experience we've had growing up of also being, a lot of my friends, they got to fall in love at 13, have their first kiss at 14 and all of those things. And I did those things too, but they were meaningless because they were with boys.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I was so behind because I had to like have all my experiences all over again, age 20. And then I felt like all these things that all my straight friends had learned about, like resilience and self, how to keep your sense of self and not co-merge, and all these things they'd learned at the age appropriate time that had become part of their character. Mm-hmm. I had already developed, but I felt like that muscle in me had atrophied, and I think that I found it very difficult. I think it's a bit different now, but I found it very difficult at the time to access, like, to read about just this kind of normal, jumbly, beautiful, broken, and also importantly, I'll keep going back to it, and boring at sometimes as well, stories about non-remarkable people doing remarkable things rather than the other way around, because often it's these really remarkable women who like pan and look at each other and don't say very much for the whole novel, then it ends. And I'm like, what about the other way around? What about all of us who are just like, trying to pay our mortgage? Why is no one writing about them?
It's like the 1980s movies for straight people. Do you mean it's kind of, romanticized and it's all, sexualized and it's all the glamour without the reality?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, completely. Like, or like something, all the things I see about lesbians on, I'm going into TV more now than anything, but apart from Mae Martin's new thing, which I think is brilliant on Netflix, but it's always really like intense, like almost BPD, like charged, crazy, like full on things. And actually, of course, I have those things in my life, beautiful relationship and everything, but I just think, my God, it's just, I remember watching The L Word when I was like 18 and thinking, I can't be like this. I can't be like this. Do you know what I really love? I love eating roast potatoes and watching Holby City. Like, that is what I love. I don't want to be going to like a club in Malibu and like touching my tits on a rooftop whilst like snorting coke at 3 a.m. I don't want to be doing that. I just want to have my carbohydrates on the sofa.
I love that. So how did your book come about, and why is it called Neon?
So my book I always wanted to have a book in a bookshop. It was like most girls dream about getting married or having a baby. That was my dream. And I think for me, so that's a collection of my poetry over the last 10 years, really, of all the spoken word work that I've done, all collated and put together. So it kind of existed organically, although I had to go through a heavy editing process, because I think things that work on stage don't necessarily translate onto the page as well. So that was an interesting process. But for me, with the book, I found this publishing house called Burning Eye, who publish specifically spoken word poetry. So I thought, I'll write to them and give them my manuscript and ask them what they think, so that they can give me advice on how I can make this better, what kind of publishers I could approach, whether or not I'm ready to publish, And then they got back to me and they said, we'd like to publish it. And it was on April Fool's Day as well. So I was like, is this real? I remember I was teaching a class on Macbeth and this email popped through and I just thought, but it's April Fool. And I just didn't think that was going to happen. It didn't even occur to me. And they said, you want to publish it? And that was it. It was like, that was it. It was just the most beautiful, mad thing I think that's ever happened to me. But it's called Neon.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, carry on.
It's called Neon for 3 different reasons. The first is that's the name of the song I was listening to in my earphones when I first saw my partner across the room 11 years ago.
Oh,
yeah. But then I wrote a poem about it because I'm intense and too much, and I won a slam competition with it, which was really lovely. The first slam competition I'd ever won. And then the third reason is that, again, going back to that idea of wildness contained, for it's literally, to me, it's light and color contained in a tube. And like, for me, that is how I feel. That I feel the same. I feel a bit like that's a really good metaphor for holding a fucking great book, like you're holding a neon sign, and I can feel the current shuddering up my arm into my light bulb heart. And I've got a big thing about light and a big thing about electrics. And so neon just seemed, I don't know, it just seemed like that's what I had to call it. Also, I told myself in my head, if I ever wrote a book, that's what I was going to call it. And it was just too late by then. It was always called that. So like, we need to talk about the title, maybe some different, and I was like, no, that's what it is. I just, because also I think for me, like, something experience of having the most debilitating mental health issues is that when I have moments of it's different now, but back when I had moments of joy, or it really did feel like I'd been dipped in neon, because my life was a really dark and grey place. So any moments of joy that came, I did feel like, someone had come and put their neon hand over my heart, and like for a minute I was warm, and I was bright, and I was lit, and I was with everybody else. And so yeah, that's why it's called Neon.
Yeah. And when I was like, preparing for this interview, I was like, yeah, that's such a perfect name for, I could see light running through everything that you do. So it's beautiful. And as you said, you bring light, you paint light, and you bring color into darker topics. And you said in your TED talk that you wished you had turned purple.
Oh my God, wouldn't it be great?
Yeah. What did you mean by that?
Okay, so I hate any illness that's invisible, because unless you are eloquent and assertive, then you're constantly having to advocate for yourself, and often you have to tell people you're in pain because you can't show them. So unless you learn how to tell it in the exact way people want to hear it, people don't want to hear it. So I thought, how great would it be if I never ever had to say? Because then also I would look way braver, because I could go into work and I could say, instead of saying, I'm really, really struggling today, my hands are shaking, but you can't see because I've taken a, diazepam, and like, I would go in looking like whatever her name is from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Veronica Blueberry, or whatever it is, Veruca Blueberry.
Yeah.
And like, my boss would turn to me, or whoever in this dream scenario, one of my thousands of dream scenarios that will never happen in my head, add it to the list, is, oh my goodness, baby girl, do you realize how purple you are? You're so brave. I can't believe you got on the train, but you must go home, and me getting to protest. No, don't send me home. I promise I can. And then them the fight, and then them going, no, I'm afraid if you're past this particular shade, and getting out one of those Barrow and Ball, like, spectrometers or whatever they're called, like, and going, no, you're past number 7, you've got to go home, and being like absolutely fucking blameless in my illness, because there's always been, and I say this in a TED talk, I've had imposter syndrome, and I gaslight myself constantly. And I think even I started thinking, maybe if I just tried harder, maybe if I just did more sport, maybe if I ate better, and I didn't feel like I earned the right. And actually there was times in my life where I cannot believe I was able to go into work. But the only reason I was able to go into work was for no other reason other than fear of missing a rent payment, and the fact that my illness was invisible. Because if you could have seen me, I feel like I would have been blue lighted straight to hospital, because I've been in such horrendous places. And I just feel like, why do I always have to tell people? And I had a really interesting experience last year, actually, which is something I haven't talked about yet since coming out of the pandemic, really. But I lost a lot of weight because I had a breakdown, and I lost just shy of 5 stone. Oh, wow. And so I've gone from this kind of 6 foot, big busted matriarchal kind of like mum figure to people, to this kind of, I want to say skeleton in a ginger wig, but I mean, no. And I think for me, like, it's been so interesting because apart from like loads of unique stuff coming up in relationships about, like, fat phobia and all of these different things, and how some of my friends have struggled with it, but also something I found really interesting is that people took my breakdown so much more seriously because I looked so ill. Yeah. And I actually had a breakdown nearly as bad when I was 22, but I didn't lose the same amount of weight. And I had people open the door and gasp, I was unrecognizable. And I remember once saying, I really loved it, so it was okay. I said to a friend, I told you I was ill. And actually, if I'm honest with you, it's a pretty dark thing to admit on a podcast, but I felt quite vindicated. I was like, and it was like, I think it was a little bit, it became a bit of a problem for me eating, because it came a bit like my version of being purple, a bit like self-harm, but like, here's something to show you, a visual barometer of the fact that I don't want to be here anymore, because I'm a writer and I'm out of words, and I don't want to have to always talk. Sometimes I want my body to do the talking for me. So now it is. And I was really unhealthy and very disordered, but it's the truth. I think I needed a break from the language of my pain. And I wanted to relax into the physicality of it in a way.
Yeah, and it really,
it's really messed up, isn't it? Probably shouldn't have cut that bit. Yeah.
No, but it really symbolizes as well, how, in society, we only recognize and acknowledge the things on the external being a reality. Like, we don't respect the internal, which I actually call quite the feminine, right, of the stuff that we cannot see in the world, all of that kind of stuff, that we don't value it, and that really needs to change and shift. Just because we can't physically see things doesn't mean that it's not there, like our energy and our connection to each other. And we started this podcast interview talking about the heart, and they've measured the heart science. You can the heart's energy up to 7 meters away.
Wow, have they?
Yeah, the Heart Math Institute. So that vibration,
that's beautiful,
is real, right?
Oh, I might write that down.
Yeah,
that is I just think, how lucky am I that I can use words? Because I've got friends that are so much cleverer than I am, but they're really good at building stuff or operating on people or paperwork or all these. That's their kind of their easy, space.
Yeah.
And so what are they going to do? Build a table to give to the doctor to say how much pain they're in? Like, show them their most recent heart surgery? Like, I feel so lucky that the thing that I happen to be okay at is something that means I'm able to get across to people how I feel. And even then, I've been by the, I'll talk about this in a bit, but especially the NHS, which is a beautiful, wonderful thing if you have physical health problems a lot of the time. But my God, is it on its knees for mental health? It's a mess. It's just a mess.
We both work with people from disadvantaged communities, etc. Talking about friends not being able to articulate themselves, but let alone people in certain communities, etc. And tell me more about that in terms of your TED talk. You talk about the depression tips, the very helpful, in inverted commas, depression tips that you were given by an older NHS male doctor. You talk about being a lesbian teacher in a Catholic school. You talk about the pointlessness of badminton. It's part talk, part performance. It's amazing.
Thank you.
How did you prepare for your TED Talk, and why was it? I know I've heard you say it's the hardest thing, one of the hardest things.
Yeah, I found it incredibly hard. Like, so the poem in it, the list, that already existed. So the director of TED was in an audience of a show that I did, and she heard that poem. So the poem already existed. So I had to write the talk around the poem. But the reason I found it one of the hardest things that I've ever done was partly because I don't, well, I do now, but no, I don't really. I don't get paid to write talks. I get paid to write poems. And I think for me also, I mean, I talk every day in the classroom, but this was a whole new ballpark. And I think the thing that made it particularly difficult for me was that it was the first thing I had done since the breakdown. And I mean, I had been MIA for a year. I'd been so unwell. Like, I couldn't even feed myself, this was my first outing. And just as I started to heal in the March, April time, we went into our first lockdown. And then of course we were on lockdown. And then in February, my first outing, I mean, I couldn't even go to my parents for Christmas, was being picked up in a car and taken to Abbey Road Studios to do a TED Talk in front of no one. And that was the hardest thing. That was why it was the hardest thing I ever did, because I mean, the director was in the audience. There was 3 people, but because of COVID. Yeah. And so I was doing it blind, and I've never done that. I've never ever performed with so much passion to an empty space, pretty much. And I don't mean that nastily to the director of TED, because she's wonderful, but it's I'm so used to going off an audience of hundreds of people, and then also when you tell a joke and it gets a little laugh, you work out that maybe your audience maybe likes this, so I'll adjust the next one a little bit, or I'll see that there's a lot of suited and booted in the audience, so I'll turn up.
You're feeling, you're empathetic. We were talking about that before we hit record. You're an empath, as it were, and you tune in, right?
Massively. But also even stuff I didn't really know. So if I'm telling a joke in it or whatever, it's okay, well, do I wait and imagine people laughing? Do I, and actually we did it, we did the take twice. I did a rehearsal, which they filmed, and then, but if the rehearsal was fine, they would keep it. But they said, can you do it again and give it a bit more? Because normally you're bigger. And I said, I am normally bigger, but I feel a bit shrunk because I haven't got that energy to feed off from a crowd. And also for me as well, the cameras in my face, I'm not used to that. There were 4 cameras positioned in different places, and I was just thinking, and on top, I don't even know what I look like from the side when I perform. I do now, and I don't like it. But
you did an amazing job. That whole day was amazing. I was crying on the sofa. It was really emotional. You and the other women. It was an incredible event. And also on top of that, not forgetting that you've been at home. I'm sure you weren't sitting in your gym jams the whole time, but particularly it was the hardest lockdown. I think the winter one, wasn't it? The longest winter, and then again we're not interacting with people, are we? So you're kind of right, off you go. Now you've got to perform, and there is nobody there at the same time. So
yeah, and also I'm really social, but I've developed, and I'm just going to have to deal with it. But I'm getting a bit agoraphobic. I'm getting stressed in group scenarios. I've forgotten how to talk. I'm out of practice, let alone it really was the first thing that I had done since the breakdown in 2019 was in 2020. I honestly, I was, my mum came home once and I was watching the TV, but I'd forgotten to turn it on. I was that bad, and I'd finally started to get better. And of course, lockdown, and I wasn't able to work because I'd been too ill. So I'd just been in my little flat with my girl, and daydreaming, reading children's stories, thinking about centre parts, because that's my favourite thing to think about. I love centre parts. Playing with my cats.
Don't forget the cat.
Playing with my cats, my beautiful cats, Ruby and Coco. And to be honest with you, watching Sister on Netflix, really, that was kind of my life. Yeah. And it was suddenly back into spoken word again and back into the big stuff. And I think also as well, something I've been nervous about was thinking, again, I put myself on the, what's it called when you cut a bit of meat on those, sending myself to slaughter, but I'm putting myself out there again, my most vulnerable things. but then I think it's made me feel invincible, because I'm like, honestly, like there is nothing that people don't know about me now. So, I might as well just carry on. But I think it's not like I'm sat there talking about, not that this is a bad thing either. It's brilliant that people do this, but I'm not talking about something. I'm actually not talking about something that's containable. I think the only way I contain my pain is through rhyme. That's my plant in a plant pot, water in a pool, neon in a tube, my pain in rhyme. That's how I hold it. But I think for me, like what I was talking about was the fact that I was so ill that it was not holdable. It was not containable or holdable, and it was absolutely terrifying. And I've never had that before, where I thought, this might kill me, but also to lose, your grasp on reality, to lose any kind of holding and containment that you've worked on your whole life. To just suddenly to lose it, for it to go out of the window. Well, not suddenly, it's a slow process, but then when you wake up, it's a bit late to suddenly start adjusting things because you've gone so low. But I mean, I just remember I couldn't get my legs out of bed. I couldn't swing them out of bed. I had to crawl to the loo, and we went to the doctors, and this is how the TED Talk started, because I went to the doctors and I said, I can't move. I had friends bolster me in. Like, I couldn't walk properly. I lost 5 stone. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't, and the doctor said to me, he just said, he's got something like a lovely smile, and you really should think about playing badminton. And I remember thinking at the time, like, it wasn't funny at the time. It's hilarious now. My friends like buy me a shuttlecock and throw it at my head. But at the time, honestly, I think I've never ever wanted to die more, because I just thought this for me was the biggest deal. I had to get friends to help me to get there, my partner to shift me out of bed, shower me, get me dressed, so I could come here and beg you, and I'm on my knees telling you I don't want to be here anymore, and that is what you are telling me. And I'm diagnosed bipolar, diagnosed OCD, on a full range of meds, receiving psychiatric help, and that's still what you tell me. And so the thing I had to do, which is, I mean, a massive position of privilege, which is something that most people don't get to do, was I had to go private. Because for me, it's about spending your life savings. But for me, if I hadn't spent my life savings, there would be no life. So it got to that point where it was that bad. And my private team, my psychiatrist and my therapist in particular, like, saved my life, because, and my partner as well. But it gets to a point where when you're that mentally unwell, it's not a thing for family and friends anymore, or partners. It's beyond that. You need a team.
What is next for you, and where can our listeners find you?
Gosh, okay, what is next for me? I have no idea. My head is always in the clouds. My partner and I are moving up to northern Scotland. Amazing. I really, really love animals, so I'm hoping to be able to foster and adopt some animals and get some land and write, which would be amazing, and still look after young people part-time. I feel like I just love being in the company of teenagers. They keep me electric, and to write my next book, which I would talk about, but I don't think I'm allowed to. So ... ellipses. But if you want to listen to me, I'm on my website is BethanyRosePoetry.com. You can have a little look at my stuff, my TED Talk and stuff, and you can buy my book Neon on there as well, which is a great. It's a great. It's not really the right word. It's a good book to get if you're somebody who experiences kind of longing and sadness and grief, and because I think it's a book that what I wanted to do was create a book that's a handout, like an actual physical reaching out to people who are like me, saying, I get it, I feel like this too. Read this, because I want you to know, not as tacky as you're not alone, but I just want you to know that there are so many of us, and I'm one of them, that burn too. And I promise you that the way that you feel is rare and authentic, because it's your experience, but there's also, collective sadness is really important to talk about as well. And I say in a TED Talk, in a culture where, don't be too sad because someone's sad, or somewhere people have got it worse. And I say in the talk, well, we don't say that. If you ring me with happy news, I don't say to you, don't be too happy because someone somewhere is much happier than you. So why do we do it with sadness? But I think, it's a book about what it's like to be a bit sad, a bit mad, and a bit neon, really, but mostly a bit mad, really, mostly mad.
I love it, and so relevant for this year, I think, as well. People will be feeling all of the things much more than they were before. So I knew we were going to go over time, and it's just been so amazing to have you on, Beth.
Thank you so much for having me. It was beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. Speak soon.
Thank you. Speak soon. Bye.
Thanks for listening to She Rebel Radio, the podcast for women unlearning conventional rules and creating their businesses of significance. She Rebel Radio is executive produced by award-winning coach and advocate Lulu Mins. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit subscribe. And if you're feeling social, find Lulu Mins and the She Rebel Radio community using the links below.